So please make sure, she said, to talk to her about it. She's got some cards, so that might be of interest to people. This panel is on the period from 1810 to 1910, which was a century of great change for the Quapaws, a big change for the Quapaws. Over the course of the 19th century, the United States gained military control over Arkansas. After the War of 1812 ended, tens of thousands of Americans came to Arkansas, squatted on Quapaw land, and changed the balance of power in the region from what we were talking about in the earlier period to these large changes of the 19th century. The Quapaws were afraid they would lose all their land, and so in 1818 they agreed to a treaty under a lot of pressure, which greatly reduced their lands. But that didn't work, and in 1824 they had to sign a treaty that ceded the rest of their lands in Arkansas. After several years of wandering in Louisiana and Arkansas and Indian Territory, which we're going to talk about in a moment, many of the Quapaws began to rebuild in northeastern Arkansas, where the Quapaws are today. The federal government had obligations it owed to the Quapaws from these treaties. By the time of the Civil War, the federal government was no longer fulfilling its responsibilities, so some of the Quapaws signed a treaty with the Confederate States of America to try to get the Confederacy promised to live up to some of these obligations that the federal government was supposed to be doing. Other Quapaws fought on the side of the Union, and most of the Quapaws ended up being refugees because of the violence of the Civil War. The Quapaws came together, many of them, most of them probably by the time, at some point in northeastern Oklahoma, and worked to rebuild their nation. Probably their greatest challenge would come in the second half of the 19th century with allotment, which was the federal government's process of trying to end Indian nationhood, force Indians to divide up their lands and stop being nations. In the face of these pressures and with divisions among them about what to do about all of this change through good and bad economic times, it's really important to remember the Quapaws, as you see here today, remained Quapaws both individually and as a community, as a nation. This panel is intended to help us understand how the Quapaws dealt with these tremendous changes of the 19th century and how they responded in creative ways. I'm just going to give a real quick introduction to each of them, and I want them to, of course, do most of the talking. Risa Supernaw Proctor is a Quapaw tribal member and a tribal elder. Billy Joe Proctor is a Quapaw tribal member and language committee member. And Carrie Wilson is a Quapaw tribal member and NAGPRA director for the tribe. So I'm just going to start by asking Risa to tell us a little bit about these moves by the Quapaws that I just briefly referred to, where people went and how they stayed a community and tried to rebuild after being forced out of Arkansas.
Okay. When the Quapaws were forced out of Arkansas and into the Indian Territory, the ones that brought them out was Hackaton and Kahikateta, which was Lame Chief, my great-great-grandfather, and Watishi, Joseph Lame, which was John Berry's great-great ancestor grandfather. They came together and they had their clans and they brought them out. At that time, there was Lewis Quapaw that took his people and joined from the Red River and joined Chief Bowles of the Cherokee tribe in Texas, northeastern Texas. And they stayed down there for quite some time until they were forced out of Texas, that group of Quapaws, and came up to Holdenville, and they made their camps by Fort Holmes on the Canadian River by the mouth of the Little River. And they were there for quite some time. But our group, Watishi and Lame Chief, they came on up and they went to, oh, do I have the map there? Yana? Map. Flame on.
Just keep going.
They have, and were coming to the reservation that they had been allotted, had been given in the northeastern Oklahoma. And that map shows you, but they went ahead and camped on the Seneca group, which was below the Quapaw group, and which was a mistake. And later in 42, they moved, they were starving then, the Quapaws had nothing, and they moved them on up. Let's see, there was a very few that stayed around the Quapaw area, and that was about 39 of them, and the tall chief went ahead and or Lame Chief went ahead and took all his people up, and they went on the Neosho River just up from Chetopa, Kansas, and they stayed there in the middle of the Osages for quite some time until they ran them out of, or they forced them out of Kansas, and that's when the home group, the one group stayed, the 39 total people stayed there at Quapaw, and then Lame Chief, Tall Chief brought their people down and were invited by the Osages that they could stay on their reservation, and they camped there for many years on, they called it Quapaw Creek by Skytook, Oklahoma. And that was the main body of the group. There was, when they started out, when they left Arkansas, there was 400 to 500, but they lost so many people with illnesses and starvation, and lost hundreds. And so what ended up around Skytook was probably around 150, and then those at Holdenville and those at Quapaw. Then the Civil War, they forced, well, prior to that, the Civil War, they forced those Quapaws up into Kansas, way up into Kansas by Ottawa. And they came back down then after that, and that's when they spread out again. But the Holdenville group combined with the Skytook group, or the Quapaw Creek group. And at that time, when they left Arkansas, they still had their sacred corn that they used for medicinal purposes and for their ceremonies, and they still had their seashells that they got from where they came from originally, from the East Coast, Carolinas, and they used those shells for everything. They used them for their name giving. They used them for their other ceremonies. They wore all the children wore the seashells. They always wore them on their neck or in their hair. The young girls at that time, and up until about 1880, wore their hair in braids, kind of like the Princess Leia thing, kind of around their ears. And then when you got older, you put it back behind your neck, back here. You put it in a braid back there. And let's see now, I've lost my train of thought. I got talking about that. But then the government, one thing I was going to share with you, which I know isn't true, but they always talk about the tribe and how handsome the Quapaw men were, and not so much the women. But I think it's because the women did all the work. But anyway, so the government wanted to force them back from Skytook or from Quapaw Creek back up to Quapaw so they could allot the lands, keep their land. And so that's at that time, they went back to Arkansas, the home group, the 39 people, went back, and they had to have more people in order to keep all of their land. So they went back into Arkansas, and Saracen who was elected by a group and not a hereditary chief, he was still there. So they talked to some of those people, and they brought them back in order to increase their land allotments. And then they, then they had also non-Indians that were in the group, and they tried to just make up the tribes. So they had Munsey's, and they had New York Indians, they had Seneca Indians, intermarried and combined. At this time, we kind of lost a lot of we lost our seed for the corn. When Tall Chief died, he was the last hereditary chief. He took with him the Quapaw song. He took with him all of the stick songs, the sacred dances and ceremonies, and so we lost a lot of tradition at that time. That's when they tried Tall Chief. We lost our religion from that they had brought over from Arkansas, and so he Tall Chief brought in the ghost dance, but the government was against that, so we didn't adjust to that. So then they brought in the peyote, and that was 1898, and that's when the peyote religion was brought to the Quapaws, and they started practicing that, and still do. Then did they get the map? Oh yeah, there's the map. And so we were up at the very top of the Quapaw. I hope you can read that. And the Senecas and Shawnees were below us. And when we were in Skiatook, there was a Hominy Creek, a Delaware Creek, a Bird Creek, and the Quapaw Creek, and it was all in the vicinity. And that's when we got some of our dances from the Delaware, which was right below us. And the Delaware had a stomp ground there, and so did the Lowell Shawnees in Sperry. And so we started doing the stomp dancing at that time. That's when we found that, but we didn't do that before then. So then that brings us up to 1900s. So we were all back up there to Quapaw. Some of the families, like mine, stayed with the Osages. John's people stayed with the Osages and just went back up for the ceremonies and the things that we had to go up there for and be with our people. So I think I probably forgot a lot, but anyway, that's all I know. So that's it.
Did the coming back for ceremonies, did that help in the future when the people came back together and needed to sort of?
Well, they always met around the July the 4th up there, wherever they were, Skiatook or Holdenville or Kansas or whatever. They came back up there, got their rations, and had their. It wasn't a powwow. It was just a get together. They ate and visited and got their annuities and payments and what have you.
And then today's July 4th powwow sort of continues that.
Yeah, and it's been continued. Mm-hmm.
I think that the powwow July 4th celebration was really probably towards the green corn ceremony or bus ceremony, and then it evolved into the powwow that we know today, bringing people together, especially being in northeastern Oklahoma, because in northeastern Oklahoma, in Ottawa County, there were 13 different tribes removed to that area. So you had the Ottawas from New York, you had Seneca Cayugas, Eastern Shawnees, Modocs from California, Oregon, all these, this one county was like the ultimate melting pot of counties for Indian people. So it was an opportunity for all the tribes to share in each other. But one of the things I think that evolved about the July 4th, especially handing out the rations and annuity payments and things like that, it was the government's way to kind of reinforce that you're a part of America, we're going to give you these things, on July 4th, our Independence Day. And I think that's how it evolved, had its ties to patriotic America,
Billy, do you want to talk a little bit about education, either sort of in the past and boarding schools, and how that's changed to today, and language and anything like that?
Well, as our previous speakers have commented on, Quapaws were hand in hand with the French, Spanish, English, and we were just moving right along. But even with all of that communication and we were around these other people, our language still, was intact. We had a healthy language. Even as our people were not so healthy, our language continued on. And, most every tribe has the same scenario. We were around Europeans, and language was still used in the homes. And of course, you had the marriage. You had Quapaw people generally marrying other Quapaws, so that was the language of the home. But when the U.S. government came along with the boarding schools, which was supposed to help, the tribes assimilate, that they taught our children that our language was no good. You need to throw it aside. It wasn't going to get you anywhere. Ridiculed, beat. Yeah, I'm sure some of you have heard the stories. I mean, it was a very, harsh time, and they would take our youth from the home, raise them in these boarding schools, and basically just brainwash them and tell them all your ways are no good, they're bad, put that language aside. And it worked, I mean, that's for years, for centuries, we kept everything was intact, our ways. But when they came in with the boarding schools, that experiment worked, and they took our language, took our ways, made the children feel ashamed, when they went back to their homes. You hear stories all the time of, Quapaws being used in the home, yet the children could understand but would not answer back. They wanted to answer back in English because, like I said, they were brought up, in these boarding schools from youth to buy in that they were they were inferior. They needed to learn these white ways, and that they need to put all of those other ways aside. So when we talk about we lost this and we lost that, we're sad when we say that, but that was a lot of our elders were, you put that aside. That's not going to get you anywhere. You need to learn this way. But that's what happened to them. That's how they were brought up in those boarding schools.
And what about today and sort of language revitalization and education today?
Oh yeah, all across Indian country. Now tribes are actively pursuing to revitalize their languages. We now see an importance in it. Our youth now see an importance in it. And this is, like I said, across all Indian tribes are dealing with this, the loss of our languages. And some are, it's basically fluency is gone. A lot of tribes, and when I say fluency, I'm putting the bar up here. Just as I'm sitting here, just as we're visiting with one another, that form of fluency, that comfort to just express any thought at any point and convey your message and be understood, that's where I'm saying. That's not to say there aren't people with, a good, a knowledge of the language, but just that comfort, that fluency to be with our languages, if you don't use them, you lose them. you know, some people were fluent as children, but if you don't have anyone to talk to, you know, you forget. And I think, you know, I've heard that from a lot of people who've had Spanish or French or just whatever. You know, they were, yeah, I used to be really good at it, you know, but you don't use it, you lose it. And, you know, we have, and I say Indian country, a group, you know, as a group of Indian people, we have conferences, we get together, and it's the same story. Our younger generation, well, they don't see a importance in it at that age. You know, it just takes us a little while. I was the first. I was there too. These guys would try to get me to listen and learn, and I didn't see any importance in it. Didn't want, just wasting my time. But now, you know, I'm interested. There's nothing I'd rather do than just sit around and go through language things and old materials. But we're trying to get our youth to get interested in that, and hopefully, you know, get as close as we can, try to get back to that fluency level of just, as I'm sitting here conversing with you guys, then that'll, you know, that's what we're shooting for.
I think a loss of language, Indian language like that, is a loss in the way that you think. You know, you speak in English, you think like a white man. You talk Indian, you think like an Indian. You do your ceremonies in Indian. When you talk to God, our Creator, you got to use your native language. He hears you better. You know, that's what we've been brought up with, and I think that's why language revitalization is really important for us, because it's connected to our culture. It's not a side of it; it's an important aspect of it.
A whole way of thinking, right?
Yeah.
It is. You can really see in it's very descriptive language, very, very descriptive, and you can just one aspect of that. You can see how they looked at these things, how you know, if they describe something, how, you know, like I said, in our English thought, think, well, I would have never thought of looking at it that way. But you see a sentence, you see, you know, or a word, and you think, wow, that's how they viewed that, and it's you know, it's very interesting how that they just viewed things.
Carrie, do you want to talk a little bit about your work in Arkansas and with the federal government over the years?
Well, I'll go back to removal for a minute here. You know, you're in Quapaw country right here. This is Quapaw country. You know, this is a big rock. This was the little rock. You know, there was the Quapaw Quarter is where the Quapaw Reservation began, white settlement ended. And to Acting Governor Crittenden, the territorial governor, we were the geographical irritants that needed to be removed before they could really civilize this area. You know, so I think that it's really important, and when you're walking around here and you see the Quapaw Quarter, this is the last place we were before we were removed. We were removed twice. And the first time we were moved to Louisiana, and there are accounts by Anton Barak, who helped lead that removal to the Caddos. But the Quapaws the Caddos hadn't been informed that the Quapaws were coming. And so they weren't very happy about it, and they had other tribes move in with them, and so they put them in swampland that wasn't very fertile. And women and children died in the fields trying to grow their crops. And it was so brutal that the Territorial Governor Izzard from Tennessee stepped in on behalf of the Quapaws and went before the Congress and said, these people are dying in the fields, we have to do something. A third of the tribe died of starvation and sickness in Louisiana. And they came back, and the reason the Quapaws were around Pine Bluff is because Saracen, who was a French colonial mixed blood, had a French land grant. And that gave them land to move back on. The Quapaws were the only tribe in the history of the United States government that said, look, Arkansas is our home. You know, our children have been born here. Our dead are buried here. Let's buy land. We don't want to be Indian anymore. We want to buy land and we want to be able to stay here. And they said, no, we've got land for you in Oklahoma, and that's when they were removed the second time to Oklahoma. But like Risa said, they put them on the wrong lands. and they had actually built their homes, planted their crops, and it was until that time in Oklahoma that they had kept their village structure intact. But the Indian agent saw it as his opportunity to break that up at that point. And so when they had to remove, some went back to Arkansas, some went to Osage. I mean, they just broke up into the diaspora. And it took a while to get them really back together, and I don't think they were really never back together. But it's an interesting note that they did survive. I found the other day on Ancestry.com the Quapaw Band of Osages. This was the Quapaws that the roll that listed the Quapaws that were living on the Osage Reservation. And the Quapaws didn't fare very well during the Civil War, too. Some went to fight with the Confederates, some went to fight with the Union, but a lot of them just became refugees because the soldiers came through the Quapaw Reservation and they stole everything. They took all their livestock, they burnt their homes, they had nothing. And they went to live with the Ottawas. And the Indian agent wanted to send the Quapaws back after the Civil War. And the Ottawas Indians pleaded that they stay with them throughout to springtime. So they would come home and they would have better living conditions and they could replant their houses, replant their crops and houses, but they had to start all over again. So you go from Louisiana to death, to sickness, back to Arkansas, being removed to Oklahoma, being put on the wrong lands. Civil War came, had nothing again. And so the fact that we have survived all of this and we are intact as we are now with what we have is an amazing feat in survival. So all these elders and our ancestors, it's important. It's important that Arkansas recognize its history in teaching what our trials and tribulations have been through as Indian people. We weren't the geographical irritants. We were the active participants. We laid the way for Arkansas's history and the roots in this state. And if you walk away with and teaching something like that, that's what you need to teach.
And this is a period of what, 40 years, or I can't even count how many times they had to start over, and how many different places. It's just amazing. Do you want to talk about more recent stuff about NAGPRA or any of your other?
What time? What's our time?
We're fine.
We're fine? Well, yeah, I'll talk about NAGPRA for a little bit. I'm the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Director for the Quapaw Tribe. And it's not something that I sought out in my life. It's something that just came to me, and we always believe in things are right and things happen for reasons. They come to you. You don't go look for them. You don't see them that way. They come to you. And so I got involved with NAGPRA. First, I was the Arkansas representative, the Quapaw representative in Arkansas. I was going to school here, and I'll get back to that story shortly. But I started working with the Archaeological Survey and got involved with protecting archaeological sites and then ancestral burials. And I've gone on to do that. NAGPRA came about, which is the federal regulation of trying to return items that were sitting in museums. And this was started by, probably got the most interest was the Cheyenne. And they were working in the Smithsonian, and they came across the Smithsonian staff said, well, we've got your Cheyenne, we've got some Cheyenne things we've got here, we'd like you to see them. Well, it turned out to be that they had skulls from the Sand Creek Massacre and other battles that were actually, these people were descendants of these It wasn't like it was so long ago they didn't know who they were. They were ancestors. And so that they couldn't get them back for proper reburial because they had this whole litany of red tape to go through. And it was at that point that the Smithsonian started looking at his viewpoints, the federal regulations started looking at the viewpoint and started making him a pathway for Indians to be able to repossess or gain control of these items so we could get them back back in our control so we could do with them as we pleased, bury our dead, do whatever. So that's what I've been working on, and up to this point I've repatriated, I think, probably going to museums and looking at items, identifying them with being in Quapaw jurisdiction, home territories, probably 30,000 cultural items. Things like what Betty's been making. And it's an important journey. It really is a journey for me. It's an opportunity to be able to go into these museums and look at these items and say, this is ours, this is ours, this is ours. The Quapaws lived on both sides of the Mississippi River. And I think people forget, but they were controlling the Mississippi. They were powerful enough to be able to do that. And when Marquette and Joliet came down the Mississippi River, they came out on both sides. And that's when they were holding those peace pipes up, like, hey, you know, we're not here to commit war on you or anything. And Calumet ceremony was really, really important, and I think it's overlooked as far as the importance of it. It was spread throughout nations. It goes all the way up to the north, up in the high northeast in New York, all the way down to the south. That importance of that Calumet, which is pictured in the picture of the Quapaw out there. Really, there were war calumets, there were peace calumets, and this was the method of transport to go into, like your passport, into one country to another. But as far as digressing, as far as NAGPRA is concerned, it gives me an opportunity to go in and look at those things. And like with Billy reconstructing his language and getting an idea of how, you know, you look at a word and you see what they're thinking and how they conceptualize even a blade of grass, you know. And it's the same way it is with me and like on my pots. You know, I can go in and see the character of these people and enjoy you know, like I look at their human remains, and there was one set of human remains that there's been two that really stick in my mind. One was a potter, and she had ground so many shells and tempering so many things that she had arthritis in her shoulders and her big toe from where she had pushed. Was using to push that, you know. And so you have this kind of affinity. Another one was when there was, it's in northeast Arkansas, there was a grave, and the female died. She was in her 20s, and she had severe osteoporosis and looked like she had a really painful life. She had roundworms. But when she died, they buried her with a wreath of poison ivy blossoms. And, you know, there was a care there, there's, you know, and I feel with these people. Even in Mississippi, there was a group of people, and they had a kind of a high rate of spina bifida. But those victims of spina bifida lived longer in that village setting with those people taking care of them than they do today, because it was a community taking care of them. And so you look at, through what I see in my workings, I have an appreciation and a fondness for our past that very few people are able to experience, and I enjoy that. And I see the same thing with the pottery. You know, I said that whatever's going on in the central Mississippi Valley with pots, you might look at them. There was a number of animals. Well, you don't see effigy pot animals in a lot of different areas, but in the central Mississippi Valley, there was a lot of them. So I think of these people, the Quapaws, as being kind of the cartoonist of the Indian world, because they had You know, you see frogs and they even have a little grin, and you see a bear and he's got his teeth and he's just showing them and they're all fangs, you know, real sharp, and he looks mean, but he doesn't because he has kind of this cartoon look about him. And there's even a Mississippian pot, I showed a picture of it a while ago, of an Indian man, and he's got his top knot, and very Mississippian looking, but he's got this biggest smile and these big eyes, and you never see that. Everybody else is stoic, but he's happy as he's like Walmart face, you know, smiley face, you know. And so you get this character of these people. And I think that's one thing that has saved the Quapaw people is their sense of humor. Because we just tease each other to death. And that's how if you were naughty and you were gonna get in trouble, they didn't spank you, they humiliated you. And for some reason, that works better than anything. And I locked my keys in my car more than one time, and that's been years ago, but I can go around somebody, and they're gonna tell me, oh, I remember when you locked your keys in the car, and they're gonna shame you publicly because of it. But I think that you know, you see the connection of the past with the effigy pots and the characters on that. And I think about the turmoil and the tribulations that the Quapaws have gone through. But still, there's this enduring quality, and I do think that it is the way we perceive ourselves, and we can laugh at ourselves, and we can be happy, you know. And I think that's important. So, and it's not the regular aside that everybody thinks of as being stoic and, you know, serious. They have a sense of humor. So,
Ben, are there slides that Carrie had or not? I'm sorry. Oh, yeah.
yeah, I wanted to show these. It's kind of an aside. I know that Ardina is going to talk about contemporary peoples earlier, but I wanted to have the opportunity to talk about what I've done in Arkansas. I've been kind of on the forefront ever since I was little. This is a picture of me and my mom with Harry and Bess Truman. We were at Thomas Hart Benton's birthday celebration in Neosho, Missouri. My father's an artist. He did the painting of the Arkansas out there. Anyway, I always thought it was humorous that President Truman needed a nameplate. But anyway, I was in Life magazine. In another photo of this, I was in Life magazine at age 6. So. You can go to the next one. This is premature, but I want to tell you about President Clinton. I met him as governor when the sesquicentennial flag ceremony came up, and I had an opportunity to meet with him again in Washington, D.C. during the Delta Voices conference years ago. And there were two things. One, as governor, like go to the other picture, let's see if we got the flag. This one. He was a governor at this time, and when I came to school over here, most people thought of the Quapaw tribes as extinct, and trying to make inroads back into Arkansas as an extinct tribe was kind of a feat in itself. History books, grade school history books, said that the Quapaws were extinct. I have a good friend of mine who's Walter Celestine, who was at Alabama Coshada, and he always introduces me. He says, "Oh, there's that extinct princess." He said, "I don't remember going to school in Arkansas. You guys were extinct." He said, "That's how I learned it. That's what you're going to be." But anyway, I had the opportunity. I heard that they were having the sesquicentennial celebration, and a number of non-tribal people were getting involved. And so I called up the governor's office and said, "Hey, we're the Quapaws. You know, if anybody's going to have a flag, hello." You know, Ardina Moore, sitting in the back, did the flag. And my Uncle Jess, with the medal on, he was chairman of the tribe at the time, one of his granddaughters dancing in the jingle dress. Dina Ray Huey was involved, and that's the Attorney General there, and myself next to Clinton. Everybody said, what is going on behind the flag, you know, being a Clinton joke. But I tell you what, working with Clinton's office, it was wonderful because I could call up the governor's office directly, and they did everything they could to help support the Quapaw tribe. And it was the first time, I mean, you know, really to do that. And when that flag flew over the Capitol, it was awesome. After everything the Quapaws had been through, to have that flag fly over the Capitol, couldn't ask for anything more. It was, we're back. It was the first time since we had been removed from Arkansas, that very first time. We're back.
We've got about 10 minutes for questions from the audience. I'll call.
Oh,
on-
there's another one real quick, if I can get it. But anyway, how did I get over to Arkansas? I spoke before the Arkansas State Legislature. And this was back in 1975. I was missing in Oklahoma. And David Baird, who was a history professor at the University of Arkansas, was writing a book on the Quapaws, tribal series. And my mother, being a tribal historian at the time, said, well, it seemed like it'd only be fitting that the Quapaws should go to the University of Arkansas. After all, the state's named after us. We were called the Arkansas. And it started happening. And Senator Caldwell from Northwest Arkansas took up the cause, and Jerry Jewell from Little Rock took up the cause, and I found myself speaking before the Arkansas State Legislature. And I secured an American Indian Heritage Award scholarship to the University of Arkansas. Unfortunately, I was the only one recipient because they changed the law to where you couldn't target a group. But what they did do is they reappropriated a football scholarship to me to go to the University of Arkansas. And I graduated in 1978, cum laude, with a degree in anthropology. So. That was really, not only was I working to get Arkansas to recognize the Indian, our roots, our history, the Quapaw history, but I was also working with tribe to realize their roots too, because we had to rediscover that. We had been gone a long time. And I started working with the survey at that time. Then after I graduated, I went to Washington, D.C., and I worked with the Office of Indian Education up there. And was recognized and came back to Arkansas. After Reagan got into office, they cut back 65% of my office. So I ended up coming back to Arkansas. But the important thing that I learned in working with the Office of Indian Education is you have a block fund of grants. When you're paying out-of-state tuition for that block fund, it goes real quick. So when I came back here, I worked with Dr. Mike Hoffman and Dr. David Hart at the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville. And we secured we got in-state tuition for originally indigenous people, the Osage, Quapaws, Caddos, Tunica, and then we extended it to include those tribes that had been removed through the state and to that. So the Choctaws, there's a number of tribes that have that. And there are a number of tribes that have used that along with the Quapaw tribe too. We have members that have graduated from the University of Arkansas on that in-state tuition. So I think that I just wanted to say that because I have worked hard in getting things done, and it's nice to see the yields from that now.
That's a huge deal. Most state universities don't do that. We tried at UNC. We tried to get that for the Catawbas who were moved out of North Carolina and haven't succeeded. So that's not only important, I think, for individual people, but it's a huge accomplishment among many others.
And it's nice to be sitting here.
Yeah, yeah. So questions?
Yes, I have one question. I believe Mr. Proctor was the one that talked about how the boarding schools took away the language from the Quapaw children. And I was wondering, are there programs in place now to reteach your language so that they can learn it now?
Yes, there's lots of, all tribes are working towards that. As far as Quapaws, Miss Ardina Moore teaches a class. I have a website up that lists various, our elders from the, I think the majority of them were passed away in the 60s, but family members had went in and recorded a lot of phrases and words, stories. So we have that available to our tribal members, and anyone actually for you guys can come in. There's audio. There are there's word lists going back to 1827. Carrie mentioned Governor Izard, and he has a word list dating back to 1827. We're compiling all of that together. So yeah, we are trying to revitalize that language, and it's like I said, it's there for you guys too to come in. Hope you go to the tribal website and you can have access to that, hear the audio as well. But yeah, we're trying very hard.
I'll cut in here just one second. We are going to have a website, clintonfoundation.org/fusion, where you can find all the resources, the videos that we're taking today. The resources will link to the Quapaws website where these language tutorials are. So clintonfoundation.org/fusion. Everything will be right there, sort of a one-stop shop. Any other questions? Just one second.
I think both of the ladies had mentioned other Native American tribes that had taken in Quapaw after they had been removed from Arkansas. Was that kind of only Quapaws that were taken in by tribes because maybe of their friendliness to those tribes, or were there other Native American tribes that had gone through that process of removal that were also taken in by tribes upon removal?
What you have, the Quapaws, I think a lot of the Quapaws, well, the Quapaws and Osages are both Siouan, so we speak a Siouan dialect, the Degian Siouan dialect, so we understand each other. And we had always been, I think even when in Arkansas, the Quapaws and the Osages lived in close proximity with each other too. So there's been a long association between the tribes. But as far as being taken in, the Quapaws never went through with confederating with the Osages. They ended up going back to their allotted lands in northeastern Oklahoma. Now, originally the Piankashaws, the Weas, these small Ohio tribes were confederated with the Peorias. So the Peorias are made up of a number of tribes. The contemporary Peoria tribe actually consists of Kaskaskia, Peorias, Illini, Weas, Piankashaws. And so you have confederated tribes like that. At one time, let's even go so far as to say, well, the Shawnees were confederated were under the Cherokee Nation. And it was only until recently that they broke off. They're not, Shawnees or Shawnee, they're not related to Cherokee, but it became jurisdictional kind of treaties that were set up. So you have that. So you have really kind of different options going on as to how you had one tribe that might be working with another tribe or confederated or whatever. Yeah.
Were any of the code talkers, were any of them, Quapaw, I know they're not always listed. Oh, were any of the code talkers, were they, any of them Quapaw? I know they're not always listed, but.
No, because there weren't that, I don't think there were that, you look at my grandmother's age, that would have been long before World War II. They were already trying to desensitize that language at that point. The other point is I want to bring up about boarding schools too. Not only did it take away the language, it also took away parenting. You don't think about the impact of parenting on, children, and, the children were growing up in a different situation to go home. You know, there were kids that were lost. Before the boarding schools, they were sending them off, and they would change their name. So you go to school with an Indian name, they change your name, and their parents go look for their child, they change their name. How are they going to find them? We had lost children. That's why they set up the boarding school. The Catholics did the Catholic 40. They supported that because they didn't want to send their children away. You know, but you did have a loss of parenting that went on, lots of parenting skills that went on, along with the language, that I think needs to be brought up.
Last night, Judge Arnold mentioned the medals that have been given to, some of your family members, your ancestors. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
In our family, we have 3 medals. We have the Spanish medal, and Judge Arnold had shown that. We have the Spanish medal. We have a Thomas Jefferson medal and a George Washington medal. Now, I say my family, we're all descended from one woman out of, we talk these hard times, and she was the only child that survived from her father. He was a chief, and she was the only one that lived. So she came into possession of those 3 medals from her father, and of course these medals have just been handed down through our family to each chief, each son, and Grandma Supernall wound up with those. And when she passed away, she handed those out. She gave those to her 3 remaining sons that were living at that time. So we still have those, and are very, very proud of them. And like I said, I can be responsible for the one that I was given. But like I said, the Spanish medal and the George Washington medal are with other family members. But I did bring that Thomas Jefferson medal. That if you guys would be interested, I'd be happy to show you. I brought that here, and like I said, those went with those treaties that were signed with those chiefs of that time, and I've always thought as there was medals everywhere. That's what these Spanish, French, U.S. government gave to these chiefs, but there's not many remaining, and sold, or they're in museums or lost. And it's always stuck with me that, like Carrie was talking about, just in various ones here this couple days, how difficult of a time we had. And as destitute, and you had children dying of starvation, and at any point, those medals could have been sold off to help feed your family. I mean, as refugees, we were that way at one time, and those individuals kept those medals, and therefore that's why we hold them so dear to us now, because they did. And at those harsh, difficult times, they could have gotten rid of them, but they didn't. So, like I said, I would be happy to show you guys at lunch, whenever. Just ask me.
We have time for one more question. All right. Thank you very much.